Hello and welcome to our Caregiver Series. I'm Ashley DeLatour, Operations Manager of Futures Northwest, and I have two special guests today joining me. I have Christina and Yokiko. Can you please introduce yourselves quickly before we talk about the College Bound Scholarship?
Yeah, hi, I'm Christina Winstead. I work with the 12th Year Campaign at the Washington Student Achievement Council.
And I'm Yokiko Hayashi-Saguil. I work with the College Bound Scholarship.
Yay, thank you so much. So Yokiko is going to take us through the College Bound Scholarship. We're going to be asking questions and getting down to it for parents and caregivers so that we can really unpack this and understand it and do all the things that we need to do in order to land this awesome scholarship. Okay, take it away.
Awesome. So just some real quick tidbits from kind of our conversation today. First and foremost is learning what is the College Bound Scholarship, and then how you apply for it or your eligibility for College Bound, and then some resources that are available. So it's a pretty quick and easy run through.
Awesome.
So first and foremost, we're talking what is college bound, because there's a lot of misconceptions about like, yeah, I'm totally college bound, and that is awesome. But there is a slight difference for Washington State. So when someone says I'm college bound or I'm a college bound student, that means that they have applied for and are hopefully going to receive the College Bound Scholarship. And it's an early commitment of state financial aid to students who apply in middle school. So they're eligible in 7th or 8th grade as long as they apply before June 30th of their 8th grade year. And the way College Bound works is as a form of state financial aid, it combines with other things like the Washington College Grant to cover 3 very specific expenses. So that's tuition at public college rates, some fees, so it's the required fees at that particular school, and then a book allowance up to $500. So when I say the College Bound Scholarship commitment, it's the tuition, required fees, and that book allowance. What's really amazing about College Bound is that it can be used at over 60 colleges in Washington State. So we don't want students to think, well, I only go to a 4-year college or I only get to use it in a particular way. It's really an open-ended, very transferable opportunity for students. We want students not to feel like they're pigeonholed, but that they have multiple opportunities to explore. So they can use it at all of the 2- and 4-year schools.
I have a question. Does it
Absolutely
cover apprenticeship program fees? Like if you were heading into an apprenticeship pathway, like could this potentially apply to that as well?
So in some cases, it may be able to help apply to some of those apprenticeship programs, but it works very closely with the Washington College Grant. So what would be really important is as we get further along into the apprenticeship programs and how those are approved through the Washington Student Achievement Council, we would circle back and make sure that it's one of the eligible institutions.
Awesome. That's so cool that that's a possibility as well.
Yeah, students can explore certification, all sorts of different opportunities. It's not just the traditional, idea of you go straight to a 4-year school. It's got a lot of different opportunities.
Wow. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So what's really important to know about College Bound, because we talk about it, it's that early commitment, it's that early process. So really when we have students apply in middle school, 7th or 8th grade, it's about having that early conversation about how you can think about applying and preparing for college. And so step 1 is where students apply for and complete the application process by the end of their 8th grade year. And they do that by meeting income requirements. So that's when they get the application, they say, yes, I am the student, I meet the eligibility requirements, and then student, parent, and guardian sign it and then return that form to us. For our foster youth, those students are automatically enrolled into the program. And so once they're automatically enrolled, we notify them and send them information to the address we have on file. Yes.
I have another question. So
absolutely.
In step 1, how would a family know once they've sent in their application that they've been approved? Like, what does the notification look like? Is it an email? Is it a letter in the mail? How is that information given to them?
So what we do is once the application, we call it the missing information letter. So once we get that provides us with the information about how they meet income eligibility, so whether they're receiving basic food assistance, their family is receiving TANF benefits, or they have free reduced price lunch, or if they're a foster youth or things like that. If they meet that criteria, they indicate that student and parent or guardian signs the form. Mm-hmm. Once we get that, we then send a certificate in the mail home to the student. So usually once we complete the application, it takes us about 6 weeks, sometimes 8 weeks, to send that certificate back to the address that we have in our system. So usually what we'll see is that students will keep that certificate so they can see the different program requirements. You don't have to keep it, but we do try to send it to you in the mail.
And if someone didn't qualify for it, in their 7th grade year, could they reapply if their circumstance changed in their 8th grade year?
Absolutely. So that's a really great question. So eligibility, that eligibility window I talk about, that starts from day 1 of 7th grade all the way until June 30th of their 8th grade year. So that's the window to start the application. And students have until August 31st to complete the College Bound application.
Okay.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you. And then
I hope that makes sense.
If somebody doesn't qualify for it, are they notified, like, we're so sorry at this time you don't qualify, or is there just error? Like nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we get the application and we see that the parent or guardian has indicated that the student is not eligible, so they just write, we're not eligible, we do send a letter back home to the student and their family saying it's been indicated that you do not qualify. If there is something missing, so say the form is returned to us and it's done incorrectly, we then notify the student and send that information back and saying, hey, we're missing something. If you want to complete this application process, please return the form with the missing information, and then that gives them the opportunity to complete it. If that student or parent says not interested, not eligible, we then just say you don't qualify because that's what's been indicated.
Okay, and if the parent or caregiver doesn't send in that final form, they have not finished the application process. Is that
That's
correct?
right.
Okay.
That is correct. And it's not uncommon for someone not to turn the form in and just not qualify because they didn't complete the process.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So that's kind of step 1. That's that application process, making sure that we're completing the College Bound application in middle school. And then the next piece is that students have to fulfill the College Bound pledge. The pledge is to graduate from a Washington State high school with at least a 2.0 GPA, have no felony convictions, make sure that they apply for financial aid, either using the FAFSA or the WSFA, and that they apply to and enroll in a college within 1 year of completing that high school diploma. So that just means that students have a little window of time from when they complete high school before they enter into their college of choice. So it's really important to make sure that students are kind of keeping track of where they are on the pledge. So we kind of encourage them to kind of check in at least once a year, especially around the beginning of the year. And so in this, if you see on here on the PowerPoint, number 2 is that meet that income requirement. That's done through the financial aid application. And then when the student says that they're going to enroll in another college, we get to verify and see if that student has enrolled in a school in Washington State. So that's how we do that verification.
That's awesome. And one thing that I've heard from folks that they say is a really good tip is to apply in your senior year to a school, even if you're knowing that you're going to take a gap year, but apply, get accepted, and then defer for 1 year. That way your gap year doesn't turn into a gap decade, as Christina Winstead often says. This is her wisdom. I'm taking it on as mine now. But yeah, this is like such a great tip though, because if you do plan on, like, for example, for this fall, if you plan on just being like, you know what, I'm going to pause this situation because COVID, right? Not super awesome. I'm going to pause, but apply and defer. Like, make sure that you get it, make sure that you secure your place and that you've got so you can keep the College Bound scholarship.
So something I forgot to mention is that there are a select number of students in 9th grade who are now able to complete the College Bound application. And so this is something that started very recently within the last 2 years, where 9th grade students who weren't eligible but were in Washington State during their middle school years. So during 7th and 8th grade, they did not qualify for College Bound, but now they're 9th graders and they do qualify, so they can complete a College Bound application. So we just need to make sure that those students get the application. We give those directly to the high school counselors, make sure they complete that application and return it within the academic year to maintain their eligibility for College Bound. So this is new. This hasn't been in existence for a very long time. College Bound has been around since 2007, but this is kind of like the first couple of years that these 9th grade students can complete the College Bound application. So it's new, it's different, but it's the same opportunity for those students. It's just giving them a different access point. What's really important to know is that this isn't all 9th graders. It's that small select number of students who did not qualify in 7th or 8th grade, but now do in 9th grade. So on average, we're seeing anywhere between 700 to 1,500 students who meet that particular criteria. That was prior to COVID. So we anticipate that that eligibility might spike in this upcoming academic year, just because COVID has changed a lot of families' dynamics, a lot of income dynamics. So it's important to know this opportunity isn't going away for students. Our processing and our entire eligibility window is still the same. So, but that's unique and that's different.
Right. And how is that eligibility determined from people who had previously applied and then been denied because they didn't qualify, or they checked the box like we don't qualify? Or is it just anybody in the system, like they didn't have to previously apply?
Right. So the way it works is that we have a data sharing agreement with the OSPI, so the Office of the Superintendent for Public Instruction, and they let us know who these newly eligible students are. So it's coming directly from the schools, going to OSPI, and coming to us, so we can generate that application. So these students could have applied in years prior and not been eligible, but it's all coming directly from the schools back to us, so we can ensure those students get the opportunity to complete the application. But if they have questions, or if a family's like, I think we may qualify, or I have questions about this, absolutely have them contact us directly. We'd rather you hear it from us versus someplace else.
One thing that I've heard is that when students kind of get into the high school age, even though students could apply and qualify for free and reduced lunch, that they often just don't apply for it, and that might be one of the indicators that triggers in the system. So
yes,
just parents and caregivers out there, like, even if you don't want the free and reduced lunch, like, still let them know, because it triggers other things in the system that would be really beneficial. So even if you don't want that lunch, still just put it in there. Just write it down. Yep.
So here's something that's also really important. So I like to think of College Bound as that we talk about that two-step process, but it's really that early conversation about how I apply to prepare for and get ready for college. But what's really important about College Bound is that you have your middle school and high school steps, and then once you're in college, there are also some responsibilities to maintain eligibility. So first and foremost, it's to meet that pledge, which I mentioned before. Graduate from a Washington State high school, 2.0 GPA, no felony convictions, apply for financial aid, and enroll in a college, right? So it's relatively straightforward. What's really important too is that anytime a student wants to access financial aid, they've got to apply each year. So like accessing federal funding or other forms of state aid, a student doesn't get College Bound if they don't apply with the FAFSA or the WASPA. So they got to do that every single year, hopefully as soon as they can after October 1st, because ideally it's better to get it done earlier rather than later. That wild goose chase at the end of the year is not ideal for me, for anybody. And what's also super important is that, like, you know, when you're applying for financial aid, we're listing every institution or every college they're planning to attend or even consider attending, because each school has a different way of awarding their financial aid. They have different aid processes. So it's just really important to make sure to list all of those opportunities there. And then making sure that they enroll within that 1-year timeline. And I point this out because we talked about gap years and kind of deferring enrollment. We also think of College Bound as being flexible because it gives students a window of 5 years to access College Bound, but 4 years worth of funding. So why is that important? That's important because if a student takes a gap year and they graduate, you know, say they graduate with the class of 2020 and they say, I'm not ready to go to college in the fall, I'm going to wait until 2021. That's great. And they still have access to 4 years and 4 years worth of funding. But say a student says, you know what, I'm ready, I'm going to go right in the fall, but then something happens when they get to their college and they have to take a term or even a year off. That doesn't mean that they lose a year of eligibility for College Bound. It means that they can still have access to 4 years worth of funding. So it's really important. We understand students don't necessarily have a very linear, it goes from point A to point B with no meandering in between, because that's not realistic. Students need to have flexibility, so having 5 years worth of time to access the 4 years worth of funding is really crucial. So we just want students to know that we try to be as flexible as possible, and just thinking about not everybody has that, you know, ideal or perfect scenario for school. They have what works best for them, and that's what's most important.
Right. Now, what if a student were wanting to stretch out 4 years into 5? What would, but using the same amount of tuition money, like taking less classes, is that a possibility? Or is there a minimum requirement for the amount of classes or credits they have to be taking?
So there's no necessary, when we talk about minimum number of credits to register, there is no minimum to use College Bound. But what I will say is that in order to maximize your College Bound funding, you should be enrolled full time. And so I say that because students have access to either 12 quarters or 8 semesters, worth of funding. And so an example would be summer term, right? We're currently in summer. It's beautiful. It's wonderful outside. Sometimes students are like, I don't need to stop. I'm going to keep going straight through the summer term, and I don't need a break because that's ridiculous, which is awesome for them, but that still counts as a term used. So that means that if that student says, I'm going to continue, and instead of taking 3 quarters, I'm going to take 4, that's 4 of the total number of 12. So it kind of ticks away at the number of terms that they can have access for funding. And if you're not enrolled full time, you're not necessarily getting the best cost benefit for the access to College Bound. So it can count as a term used. So that kind of ticks away at the total number you have available. If you decide I don't want to do full time, that's totally okay. But if you're thinking about weighing, what is the most beneficial use of College Bound, you want to kind of keep that in mind. I can't tell you what works best for each student. They have to make that determination, but they can use it for less than full time. They could do it for 3/4 time or half time, even part time. But if they want to use the most in terms of how they spend or use that amount of money, it makes the most sense to do it full time, full enrollment.
Gotcha. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I also wanted to add, when you're working with financial aid, whether it be FOSFA or WAFSA, there is a number of credits you have to attend in order to receive aid. So you want to check with your school to make sure that, if you're going to go to school for 1 quarter and you're going to take 1 PE class and it's 1 credit, you're probably not going to get aid for that little course load. So you want to make sure you're taking enough classes to be able to utilize aid, but also be mindful of all the things that are going on in your life to find that balance between work and school so that you are able to be successful at the same time.
Yeah, and one thing that I am a huge proponent of, very similar to Christina, I think we're the same mind in different bodies when it comes to financial aid, because my saying is, when in doubt, reach out. And that means when you have questions or you're starting to make assumptions or guesses about what's supposed to be happening, that's when you should reach out to your admission counselor or your advisor or your financial aid counselor or advisor, because unbeknownst to students, right, there are all sorts of processes and things that are going on and that they probably just it's not important. I could just take a term off and not tell anyone. No, that's not a good idea. You should definitely tell someone that that's what you're thinking, because if you don't and you just make assumptions, it's not a good idea, because you may end up losing money and have to pay it back, or you may lose your enrollment status. And so that's where it's really important to not guess and make assumptions that that's going to work. You should really talk to somebody who works at your school to make sure that you're not missing anything or you're not putting yourself in jeopardy. Because I've been there. You just make the assumption yeah, everything's great. And then you're oh, I missed a deadline because I didn't check my online portal, or oh, I didn't look at this and there's this one box that I didn't check. So my application has just been sitting there for weeks. I just did that this summer. So just don't make assumptions. Go back and ask and check.
Yeah. And parents and caregivers, if you're in a conversation with your student and they're just sounding like they haven't verified a lot of the information they're talking about, challenge them a little bit. Be have you contacted the financial aid office to let them know this? You can question that and make sure that they're crossing their T's and dotting their I's.
Yeah.
And for asking questions to the financial aid office, for parents and caregivers, it's really important to encourage your student to be an advocate for themselves by asking questions. And you'll want to do some of this for them, but when it comes to college, their records are protected by FERPA. And what that means is that you cannot access their information unless they give you permission. And this is probably the first time where you have that challenge, which is that their records are their own. And it's to protect them and to keep them safe. But you will not be able to ask some of these questions, the specific questions of financial aid offices. You have to work with your students that you're supporting in this process to ask those questions if you don't have permission from the student to ask those questions. So I encourage you to work with your students to ask questions. Financial aid officers are there to help. They unfortunately are not psychic. If they were, they'd have different jobs. But since they don't know your student has questions, you have to really encourage them to be really good advocates for themselves, because we know that parents and caregivers are advocates for their students, but we want those students to also have those behaviors.
Yeah, I also think of it as it's a new chapter for everyone. And so especially with young students or young people, you also want to kind of think about, this is where they transition from the accountability changes kind of throughout their lifetime. So my husband's a middle school math teacher, so we talk about like, when do parents slowly start relinquishing control of their student and their accountability and their responsibility? It's kind of about middle school, right? Because those kids are starting to get a little bit more independent, they're more autonomous, they're making their own decisions. However, they're also responsible for getting very important information from teacher or principal or counselor home to parent, guardian, or caregiver. And sometimes that doesn't work all that great because that young person doesn't know what it means to be an adult yet. So when we get to the point of like college, that's where we're kind of making that transition into like, I am making decisions, and of course I may have my family involved, but the decisions I'm making directly impact my future, and learning how to do that responsibly. It's not easy, it's hard, but that's where we're starting to make more of these choices that are kind of directly impacting how we do our day-to-day stuff. So it's really important to be like, I know you don't want to, but you should probably pick up the phone and make a phone call and actually try to talk to the human instead of text or email or chat the human. You might have to talk to the human. And I know it's uncomfortable, but it will be worthwhile.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of texting, that's kind of ironic, but texting is a really common medium that we see students use because that's what you're comfortable with, right? And I would argue that actually a ton of adults also prefer not actually talking to humans and texting instead. But what's really great is that, so now we have this really great opportunity for students and their families to get financial aid support through a texting service. So this is Otterbot. Otterbot is our 24-hour texting service where students can get information about how to apply for financial aid, what information they may need, and just ask their general questions where it's like, hey, it's 10 o'clock on a Thursday. I could email my counselor and then wait till they get up in the morning. Hopefully they have, their email turned off, and they get up in the morning and they answer it the next day. Well, if they wanted to just text Otter can respond right away. So it's a really great, simple way to ask any questions around how you apply, what paperwork you might need, what opportunities are there. And what's also super amazing about it is that we have the ability to do nudges. So when important deadlines are coming up, or if there's really important information, or if there's events happening in a particular region, Otter can send that notification to the student, kind of like push notifications through texting. So it also uses emojis, which I think students like. I like it as an adult, so I would hope they also think it's fun. And sometimes gifts, and sometimes fun things, so they can interact and have conversations with. And if a question is asked and they're like, I'm not quite sure how to answer it, a human will answer. So it's a really great opportunity. We started it last year with the class of 2020. We're doing it again for the class of 2021. So this is really for those seniors who are getting ready to apply for financial aid and kind of make sure they have an additional resource in that back pocket.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I can attest that Otterbot is funny. Like, it's an enjoyable text that I receive. I signed up for it as a fake student just to see what it would be like. And I was like, oh my gosh, I love Otterbot. This is hilarious. Like, way to like, nudge me with some humor. Like, I'm totally more willing to, see what you're all about. So I highly recommend it.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a new platform. We're really, super excited about it.
Awesome.
So what you see here, we have a college-bound listserv. So it's way less fun than Otterbot, but super informational. So if you wanted to just get blasts of information sent out to you on a pretty consistent basis, probably every other week, at least once a month. So it's the college-bound listserv, and this is for students or even caregivers to sign up for, so you can see what your student might be receiving. So this is where we share information about when to apply for financial aid, college-bound requirements, additional resources that we have that come available. And you just apply through this, and I say apply, you just fill out the survey gizmo. So if you click on the link, put in your information, we'll add you in, and then Rochelle, our wonderful person who works in College Bound, will send out listservs all the time throughout the school year. We take a break in the summer, we pick it back up in the fall.
Fantastic. And yay, here's our website. We have tons of information to support you in whatever pathway you might choose. And this is just a little snapshot of our financial aid page where we talk about scholarships and the WSFA and the FAFSA. And there's tons of juicy information here. Lots of videos, lots of worksheets, lots of, frequently asked questions, like how-tos. So check it out. If there's something that you don't see on there that you want to see on there, go ahead and email me at adelatour@futuresnorthwest.org, because I'm a resource nerd, and if there's not something there, I want it there. All right. Well, I think that's all we have for you today. If anyone has questions for us, go ahead and put those in the comment section, and we'll do our best to respond to those and connect you with the people who have that information for you. And we hope that you are well. Please feel free. We will have our email addresses in the program description, so you can contact us there as well. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.